Well, tēnā koutou katoa, no America ho no te tematanga, no otatahi toku kainga ina nei, I roia toku tunga mahi o Perryfield Lawyers, ko Steven Moe toku ingoa, no reira ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, and I'm really lucky to have Dr. Brett Mann joining me today. And we're going to be looking at conflict and board dynamics. But I guarantee you we're going to be covering a lot of other topics as well. I've been fortunate to get to know Brett the last few years, and he has a really interesting background. And I'm going to ask him to introduce himself in a minute, and then we're just going to dive into the content. Just so you know, my name's Steven Moe. I'm a partner at Perryfield Lawyers. We're putting on these sorts of webinars, and we realize it's not normal for a law firm to do this type of thing. But what we're trying to do is resource the sector, resource people that you can go and feel empowered in your governance roles and be able to have lots of information. So as a law firm, we have 100 people and we operate in 5 different offices across the country, including in Auckland, which just opened a couple of weeks ago. So we're able to support people with property work, with disputes work, and then my particular passion and area is impact-focused work, whether that's charities or for-profit companies. So that's just a little bit about us. In the follow-up, I'll be sending the link to this recording. It will also become an episode for Seeds podcast. There's now 450 conversations there, so lots of content. And you might want to check out some of our guides and information like being a chair, running AGMs, and lots more content. But we're going to get into this. As I said at the start, before hitting record, I know you all can use the chat function because we've got lots of weather forecasts before we hit record. What's the weather doing where you are? So please, as we're talking, feel free to type in a question, and Brett and I will be able to see that, and we may answer it as we're going along, or we may save it towards the end and turn to it, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. But we would love to hear from you. It doesn't have to just be a question. You might say, oh, I heard about this and everybody have a look at this link or something like that. So feel free to make this as dynamic as we can and use the chat to do that. Yeah, really lucky to have Dr. Brett Mann here. Thank you so much for joining me. And we had an interview on Seeds now several years ago where we talked about stress and its impact on our bodies. And I know that you've done a lot in this area thinking about conflict. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, if that's okay, and then we'll get into some questions about the topic today. So over to you, Brett.
Kia ora, Steve. Kia ora koutou. I've been a general practitioner up until January of this year for 39 years and partner and owner of Island Medical Centre. I've been a medical educator for 20 years. And I did over 1,000 one-hour counselling and psychotherapy sessions in my practice with supervision from various psychotherapists. I wanted to get my communication skills up at the same level as my biomedical skills. And that resulted in being asked to redesign the College of General Practice National Communication Skills Training Program for general practice registrars. And one of the first things I got put in that was a whole module on dealing with conflict. And so I've done lots of supervision one-to-one and in groups with doctors over the last 17, 18 years. And a very frequent situation that comes up is dealing with conflict of one sort or another. I'm on the board of Island Health, which runs a health hub here in Christchurch, and I'm the chairperson of a bicultural committee promoting in the interdenominational space. New Zealand is a treaty-based multicultural society. Recently, I've done some seminars as part of governance training for chairpersons of Anglican vestries on dealing with conflict. And I've got another denomination has asked me to do some work with them on dealing with conflict later in the year. So that's the bits of me that are relevant to this discussion today.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I think if anybody wants to dive into a bit more of your background and history, while we're talking in the chat, I'll put a link to our Seeds conversation because I really enjoyed that. In Seeds, I get to go quite deep with people about their backgrounds and histories, which obviously we're not going to spend the whole time doing that, but feel free to listen to that as well. So I thought maybe before we get to the question, I'd actually like to say a little karakia kind of to open us up and to get us ready for this. So if it's okay, I will say this little karakia, which I just love. Whakataka te hao ki te uru, whakataka te hao ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huke, he hauhu, ti he Mauri ora. And that means get ready for the westerly and be prepared for the southerly. It will be icy cold inland and icy cold on the shore. May the dawn rise red tipped on ice, on snow, on frost, a glorious day. And Brett, you and I both live in Canterbury, and I think this has been accurate for maybe the last week. Every day there's ice on my window, needing to scrape it off when I get up in the mornings. So, also, can I just say there are an amazing group of people online. I was just having a look at the names. I know a lot of them. I don't know all of you, but I know some of you, and I'm really impressed by the number of you. And keep up the great work you're each doing in your organizations, because I know a lot of the work that's going on. We really hope that this is going to be helpful for you to take back to boards and other places. But Brett, I've got a basic question. This is really, really simple, but we are going to be looking at conflict. And I'm just wondering if you can set some parameters. What are we meaning when we use the word conflict? Like what do we have in mind?
So, at its most basic level, conflict is simply the act of disagreement between two or more people, and it could be about all kinds of things. So, as far as charities, boards, organizations are concerned, often it can be related to mission and purpose, strategy issues, role responsibility, turf issues. What's your job? What's my job? Leadership and decision making, and also conflicts of interest, which is perhaps a little bit different from the definition that I've given, but is important for today's discussion. And the most important of all, relationship issues, and that may involve personality clashes, but its relationship problems are the single most important indicator of declining quality of decisions made on boards and by boards, and the strongest indicator of problems with satisfaction and commitment to the kaupapa, to the purpose of the charity.
Mhm.
So we can subdivide conflict into those different areas, and I'm sure you'll connect with those.
Mhm. Well, that will be the thing as we're talking, because I think what the content of what we're about to get into, it's relevant. Yes, it's relevant for charities. It's also relevant for for-profit companies. But as well as that, a lot of this is relevant for just our daily life, interacting with people. How do I deal with this coworker? What's this situation? Because conflict, I think in a way it has a negative vibe to it, if I can use that word. It's like we got to avoid conflict. But I think what we're going to get into is that it can actually be a positive thing. So before we talk about that, what is it, if you could give the high level, what do particularly boards and thinking about chairs or people who are chairing boards? There's a lot of human dynamics, a lot of soft skills here. What is it that they need to be thinking about when it comes to conflict?
I think the first thing to recognize, and I had a problem with this because of my own personal upbringing and background, but conflict is normal. We've all got different personalities, different past experiences, different strengths, and different perspectives on all kinds of issues. And of course, we're all fallible. So conflict is normal. And there's the low-level conflict, the middle level, and major conflicts. And although the major conflicts happen less often, a lot of the middle level or lower level ones happen much more often. And often it's not uncommon that they actually don't get addressed. And it's an uncommon attribute of leaders of charities and organizations, businesses, that the leadership of those organizations actually has mature skills in dealing with conflict. And yet relationship is so fundamental to everything we do, and conflict is just a normal part of relationship, disagreement, different perspectives. So the importance of embracing conflict, especially when we're talking about strategy, tasks, various things that we're joining with other people in doing, and there are different perspectives, embracing the conflict and embracing the creative tension, because we've all got a different angle and different perspective, often on whatever the issue is. And our best decisions are made on the other side of conflict, not on this side of conflict. Our best decisions are made when we've had all the different perspectives on the table, and including the less welcome ones and the ones that I personally don't, or you personally don't agree with. But even if the people is contributing ideas and thoughts that don't make any difference to the actual decision that's made because you disagree with them or the board disagrees with them, those people will have more commitment to the decision if they've been heard. If I've got a different perspective from you about the issue and I haven't been heard, then I'm thinking, well, maybe you would have done that differently if you'd listened to me, if you'd heard what I had to say. But I didn't feel I could, say my bit. So as leaders of organizations and boards and charities, we need to invite that sort of conflict and actively invite it, commend and validate people for bringing the alternative point of view. And one of the things that happens, and we'll have all been in board meetings, leadership meetings of one sort or another, where a topic's being discussed, and you find that the energy's somehow gone out of it. It was there a minute or two ago, and somehow we seem to have lost the energy. And sometimes that's just because we've come to the end of a topic, but sometimes it's not. And you think, oh, somehow that feels like we're dragging our feet in the mud a bit. And that's frequently an indication that there is some alternative points of view in the room. There's disagreement, to that degree, a conflict that needs to be talked about. And so that gets talked about. You find the energy comes up, people are on board again, and the meeting is moving in a more healthy direction. So unaddressed conflict is closely associated with low energy about topics of discussion. And we're going to make much better decisions if we hear that and invite it.
Mm. That's really interesting points that you're making. Firstly, to normalize conflict, that this is actually a natural state of being, or that this is an important thing because everyone brings their perspectives. I'm just picking up on something that you said that struck me for a long time now. And it's actually, I throw it out as a question. How often is the role of the chair mentioned in the Companies Act? Like, it's a pretty important role. How often is it mentioned? And the answer is not at all. It's not there. But I think what you're highlighting is that the role of the chair is a really important role. I recognize some of the people on here who are amazing chairs. The role of the chair is that kind of looking around the room and being aware of the dynamics and what's going on. How do you cultivate that culture of people being willing to share or to be vulnerable to raise a conflict type of situation?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think there's the notion, sometimes I think dealing with conflict, which is anxiety provoking, sometimes provokes fear, all sorts of emotions. We kind of rather not have to go there. But for chairpersons and leaders of groups and organisations, as my good friend Grant Adams pointed out, a recent article in the Harvard Business Review was saying that the leader being able to deal with conflict is a must have, a need to have, not a nice to have. And we'll all know of situations and the groups that we've been involved with where the inability of a leader to deal with conflict has had a major effect on the kaupapa of that organisation and of the effectiveness of it. So the chairpersons of all people need to be able to we need to improve our capacities to deal with conflict. And so just come back, Steve, again to your question. I realize I've just diverted slightly.
No, it was just how does a chair actually cultivate an environment where people are willing to say something that, the toughest thing in the world is there's six people around the boardroom and everyone says this is a great idea. And you have to raise your hand and say, actually, I have another perspective here. So
Yes,
how do you cultivate an environment where a chair, that would be
yes.
okay?
So I think the first thing is reading the room and attention to hints and cues. Sometimes people will say yes with their words, but they're saying no or expressing doubt in their voice or with their body language. And the body language trumps the verbal assent every time. So if somebody seems to be agreeing, but body language is indicating otherwise, then we must address that. Oh, Stephen, it looks like you've got some doubts about that. Oh, Catherine, maybe you've got some other thoughts about that. And inviting it and welcoming it. And when somebody says something that's even quite controversial or going completely against what everybody else has been saying, we validate that person and thank them for giving their point of view. That doesn't mean we agree with it, but we really want to know what everyone thinks. And if we don't know what everyone thinks, then those people aren't heard, they're going to feel excluded, and ultimately they will have less commitment to the what we're trying to achieve. So attention to hints and cues, inviting and validating the alternative point of view. And I think, especially for chair people, working on the relationships and putting time into that. And sometimes that's, a cup of coffee with somebody outside a meeting, maybe doing things together as a board. But the relationships are the the lifeblood of of any um, of any board.
That's really helpful. We're using the chat to communicate. So Catherine's just put a great comment there saying skilled questioning will help. Like, is there a viewpoint we haven't considered? Or what might we be missing? So that's something that the chair can be framing things in a way that people can then respond. And everyone, feel free to put questions or comments. We're going to come back to your one in a bit, Mark. Can I just ask you a question, Brett? Because you said at the start that you've been involved over, decades of helping people as a GP and doing different forms of counseling and things. Can we just stick for body language for a second? What are some of the indicators that you've seen over the years that might be helpful for us to be aware of? The most obvious one I can think of is the folded arms probably
Mm-hmm.
means that they're not happy. But are there some other hints, or you mentioned cues? Like, what are some of the things that you'd be looking out for?
So looking for what you've just said, for people just pulling back in their seat,
Hmm.
sort of resting back and just um, their energy level going down, a bit of a blank lack of animation on a person's face, tone of voice. Somebody says yes, but they say, do you agree with that, Brett? Yes. And their voice is going up at the end, which means doubt, not as opposed to, yes, I do.
Mm.
Yes, doubt. You or address the doubt. Don't go past it. And going past it is a big mistake because that person will be probably disengaged for the rest of the discussion about that topic.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I like that. I'm going to be listening out now when
Yeah,
people are saying yes. Is it a yes or is it a yes? Yeah, that's
yes.
helpful. And there's more comments coming in the chat.
And perhaps another thing, Steve, on that, just to which is perhaps a little bit beside the point, but any time where somebody raises an issue twice or asks a question twice, it's very important to that person. So you never go past something that you think, well, that's a bit beside the point, or I don't think that's important, and you can easily go past it. But any time where a board member raises something on a couple of occasions, asks a question twice, you must attend to it. It's important to them.
Mm, no, that's really helpful. Yeah, it's a fascinating area because I think I want to give respect for all the people who are chairs on the call, and maybe if you're looking to get into a chair position, because guess what? There's quite a lot involved. I'm a chair of a company called Community Finance. We're about social housing. We've raised now a couple hundred million for social housing. So there's a lot going on in that environment, and being the chair means you're having to look around and realize this person hasn't spoken for 20 minutes. What's going on here? And Catherine, who is actually joining us from Japan, I happen to know, has said, I've noticed going off camera in a virtual meeting is the new body language. I've seen someone shut down, go off camera straight after, and no further comment. So it's interesting, isn't it? The online and how do we handle that as well? I'd like to turn the conversation though, because we're talking about conflict. Over your time as a GP and dealing with people, can we just dive a little bit deeper? What role does our personal history play? In other words, past conflicts and today? Like, what is it that we need to be aware of when it comes to conflict? Because each of us probably brings potentially a family history, potentially previous negative experiences. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, there's nothing like conflict to activate what's called transference. And you think, what's transference? Well, transference is where I'm in a conflict with somebody, and this conflict is triggering, activating thoughts and emotions from other conflicts I've had earlier in my life. And those thoughts and emotions are being transferred into this one. And one of the indications that that's happening is usually excessive anxiety over the conflict, sometimes even fear. And I would say for myself personally, in times gone by, I was right down the fear end of the spectrum, for reasons I'll explain in a moment. Some of us will find us feeling angry. Sometimes there's a conflict. Some people will find themselves feeling inferior and having feelings of worthlessness, and and sometimes of guilt. What is it? What is it for you? And the these emotions will be present, and some or other of them. And if they're transferential, then there'll be something excessive about it. So, and it makes it difficult for you to function. And your fight flight response gets going, your heart's beating quickly. I used to find my legs would shake a bit. And it's somewhat immobilizing. So it's fine to have normal anxiety about dealing with conflict, but excessive anxiety almost always means there's something else going on and you're transferring your past experience into these situations. So the reason that happens is because in our early lives, our brains just soak up experience for good or ill. And it's an incredibly helpful way of learning very quickly how to conduct yourself in the world. So with conflict, if conflict in our families of origin hasn't happened in a healthy way, then that's very deeply embedded, and further conflicts will activate the thoughts and emotions from that. So for me, I remember my dear mother saying to me on one occasion, "I can read you like a book." And and in situations with conflict, I thought, you can read me like a book. You can see that I'm freaking out. You can see that I'm anxious. You can see that I'm fearful. And that was unhelpful. On another occasion, I had a conflict with her, and she didn't talk to me for 3 days. And as you can tell, she had some issues from her family background that were not her fault. But she didn't talk to me for 3 days. And that meant for me, the message was that when there's a conflict, the relationship goes back to zero, and it's all up to me to put it right. So with that, with those thoughts and severe anxiety being activated and senses of feeling worthless and a bit like the naughty child. So even as an adult, the that child emotion and thinking can be reactivated. And you, in a conflict, sometimes you can if you stop and think about it, you can find yourself feeling like the other person is kind of the good adult, the good parent, and I'm sort of the naughty child. And I noticed that in myself. It's not at all uncommon, and that's a transference from the past.
Mm.
And there's a so if you start to recognize some excessive emotion, the thing is to just go and give yourself, after the conflict's over, after the board meeting, the next day, give yourself 20 minutes with a bit of paper to think about what thoughts and emotions come up for me as I think about that conflict yesterday, and just write them down. Now, there are literally, you've got 1,000 billion neurons in your head, and some of those neurons have 10,000 to 100,000 synapses. So, whatever thoughts come up, when you ask yourself, what was I thinking? What was I feeling? What were the emotions? They're important. And then you ask yourself, how far back in my life do I remember having those thoughts and emotions in relation to conflict? What's my earliest experience of that? And it's all a bit easier said than done. And often a therapist is the most helpful person to help you with that. But I do that regularly. Actually, I did that a couple of days ago with I noticed myself being reluctant to speak in a meeting. And I thought, oh, what's going on here?
Mm.
And I got my bit of paper out and did exactly that.
Mm.
So transference is all over the place. And if we are leaders and running boards, it's one of the major things that will interfere with our functioning, and some tax deductible expense by paying a psychotherapist to deal with whatever issues you have in dealing freely with conflict is money well spent. And
Mm.
I went to see the therapist, had 4 or 5 sessions, perhaps a few more, and then another round a bit later. And it was just extremely helpful. And it took me from very limited functioning to much more effective functioning in those situations.
Mm. That's so helpful. Thank you. I knew this conversation would be very interesting, and thinking about things like transference, to me, that really resonates because I can remember things in my childhood or things in high school or where there were conflict situations, and I did not like that feeling. And so it does make logical sense to me that if in my circumstance, there might be a client who is upset about something, and it's a conflict, but am I bringing everything that I experienced as a 15-year-old to
Yes,
that situation? So
yes.
I think that's really helpful. Can I just ask a question? And I'm curious, this is more wearing your GP hat, your doctor hat, but thinking about the body and the effect of this type of stress or the conflict. Like you mentioned, the fight or flight sort of response. If you're not, I got to get out of here, or I've got to fight, or can you just unpack that a little bit more? Because I'd like to understand that.
So we have two main parts of our nervous system, which is neurophysiologically instantiated. We've got our fight, flight, and freeze response. So we want to fight or flee. And if we can't do either of those, often we'll freeze. And you just feel immobilized in that moment. It's very, very hard to think. So fight and flight responses, which are mediated by adrenaline, it focuses your thinking on fight or flight, and you'll find what that does in a situation of conflict is it just completely narrows down your thinking. It's very hard to think logically because your fight flight response is excessively activated. And if you find in a conflict situation it's really hard to think, then your fight flight response is excessive. I mean, apart from, of course, when you're being attacked by a wild dog or whatever, or somebody's breaking into your house. But in interpersonal conflict, if it's hard to think, your fight flight response is overactivated, and you are almost certainly transferring thoughts and emotions from what's happened in the past into the present. And of course, it's profoundly unhelpful.
Mm.
So the tend and befriend response mediated by oxytocin, because women have more oxytocin, they're a bit more likely um, to have tend and befriend responses, although I notice it in myself at times. And
Can you just unpack what was that? Tend
the
and
tend and
befriend?
befriend
Yeah.
is the idea that I'm having a conflict with you,
Yeah.
and to deal with that, I will be overly pleasing. And many people, so we tend to have a default setting of avoidance. I had a conflict with a family member a wee while back, and he just, walked out of the room.
Mm.
That was part of his fleeing response and avoidance. Um, but sometimes we tend to be either avoiders, people pleasers, or attackers. Which are you? There'll be in all sorts of situations you'll do some of these things at times, avoid, tend and befriend, try and please the other person in an appropriate way, or even attacking is appropriate in certain situations. But we tend to have a default setting where we do one of these much more than the other. So you are primarily an avoider, or you are primarily a people pleaser like me, or an attacker. And the attackers, that's not, attacking is not bad. The attackers are people who are generally not easily manipulated, which is a good thing. The people pleasers are much more easily manipulated. So what's our default setting? Avoiding, people pleasing, or attacking? Whatever it is, the ideal is that we are able to resolve conflict and we're negotiators. And of course, you can't resolve or negotiate every conflict because it takes two to participate. And if the other person's rigid and flexible, then you may not be able to resolve the conflict. But the avoiders need to learn to stay in the space and deal with their anxieties that make them flee. The attackers, the fighters, there's lots that's good about that, but you need to develop your empathy and make space for the other person, and be gentle and kind at the same time in a conflict, while also being robust about your point of view. The people pleasers know that they're people pleasing in a conflict because you feel weak. And in conflict, we should try to never say something that makes me feel weak. Now, I don't mean vulnerable, because sometimes vulnerability is, as relating our vulnerability, there are circumstances which that may well be appropriate. That's not the sort of weakness I'm talking about. The weakness is that I've diminished myself. I've compromised myself. I've given more weight to your opinion than I have to mine. And I've receded, I've diminished. And it makes you feel weak.
Mm. It's so helpful. It's such a framing of these conversations. It helps us just to think about it. And my challenge to everybody listening or on the call or watching it later is to think about your own Well, first of all, your own personal history and your background, but also what is your natural reaction to conflict? Is it, like you say, attacking, avoiding? Is it people pleasing, or what would it be? Because that will then help you the next time something happens to be maybe a bit more proactive than you have been. Another element I want to throw in here, I'm curious for your thoughts, is the influence of culture and different dynamics from different backgrounds. So I lived in Japan for 5 years. So it's quite an interesting dynamic for me having, I was only 21 when I moved to Japan, and I think it influenced the way that I approach conflict quite heavily because in Japan, it's a very much a face-saving, you would never directly say something to someone. You know, it would always be, let's have a conversation over here before the meeting, or let's work this out. So it's just maybe I'll throw that in. You can comment. Just that there are different cultural things that we need to be aware of as well. Any thoughts?
Yes, there certainly are. And when we talk a little bit later about some other ways of dealing with conflict, this is very much a Pākehā perspective. Um, from the limited experiences I've had in Te Ao Māori, I've rather liked the frankness and openness in marae situations of people saying what they think, and then you have kai afterwards. And there's something about that that's a bit more honest and a bit more robust. And of course, every culture has its function and dysfunction with respect to dealing with conflict. But yeah, some cultures are naturally more avoidant. I think the Italian and Spanish influences, often people are more upfront and honest and open about what they think and believe. You know, the Dutch traditionally are understood to be, you know, fairly frank and blunt. But Pākehā culture, I don't think dealing with conflict is a strength. I think we tend to be more avoidant and like to skirt around it where possible. But you know, not dealing with conflicts, especially in board situations that have come up, if we don't deal with it, it needs to be dealt with. We're just waiting for something bigger and worse further down the track. And I'm thinking of a charity particularly in mind at the moment where that's exactly what's going on at the moment. The indications were there. There was significant issues a couple of years ago. They were avoided. And now there's all sorts of problems.
It's interesting what you say there as well about sharing food or kai together, you know, like to be able to have that informal context of meeting. And I think that's a really important aspect that sometimes my fear, because we do so much online these days, and you know, let's have a Teams catch up or a Zoom call, but you're missing that hard to put a value on it, but being able to look somebody in the eyes or share food and actually have that conversation. So I think where we're getting to is that conflict can be perceived as bad, but actually it can unlock new ways of thinking. Because if you're avoiding conflict, if you're not able to express it, then you're missing out on the wisdom of the room. Can we talk a little bit about maybe the best way to phrase this would be what are some rules of engagement, like managing conflict, or I'm thinking particularly because we've said it's prevalent, there will be conflict. So what are
Yes.
some things, what are some tools or tips that you've got for us, rules of engagement for conflict?
I think the idea of boards having ground rules for board members, and you can download ground rules for boards off the internet, and having that as something that you can refer back to. Well, these are the ways of operating that we've already agreed to. So our conversations are always going to be respectful. We're going to be kind but robust in our discussions, and and this discussion seems to have deviated from that. And you can go back to that. So it's kind of like a stake in the ground that you can refer to later. And I think that's definitely helpful. As my friend Grant, who's on here today, was saying too, that a good idea with that is that if you have a new person coming onto the board, you can give them the ground rules, and you can just we each remind ourselves of what the ground rules are for us as a governance group. And so the chairperson sets the culture. The chairperson's the one who's going to just do these sorts of things. The chairperson is going to keep an eye on the relationships, making sure that they're as healthy as possible. Sometimes easier, of course, said than done. Sometimes the need to have meet with people outside the board meetings to have a one-to-one and just build the relationships. The board I'm on at Ilam Health, the chairperson there is very good at doing that, and it makes such a difference.
Mm. I think it's about being proactive, isn't it? All of life comes back to this basic principle of being proactive and taking steps. The fact that everybody is here, there's so many dozens and dozens of people on this call. This is the right steps to be taking, thinking about it, learning about it. The other thing, though, with the proactive is just a flip of listening for the tone of other people and how they express it. So I've got a friend here as well, Craig Fisher, said, Gracie's put a comment saying messages are delivered 7% verbally, 38% vocally, and 55% body language and facial.
Exactly.
And Craig's added to that, we're generally not good at being aware of how we are showing up to others. So I just thought I'd mention that as a challenge to all of us. When you're in a meeting, how are you coming across? What is the inflection that you're using? And maybe be thinking of that as well.
Can I make a comment about that,
Yeah,
Steve?
yeah.
Although I haven't done it in board meetings, I've done it in other meetings where I actually just turn my phone on. I tell the other participants that I've got my phone on, I'm recording the meeting, and then just listen to it afterwards. And did I talk too much? Well, you are the worst. You are the worst assessor of whether you've talked too much in a meeting.
Yeah.
And because when you are in flow, the sense of time contracts, and you've been talking for 5 or 6 minutes when you think it's only 2 or 3. So you can get an assessment of yourself, and this ongoing reflective practice, reflecting on what we're doing and how we're functioning, can be very useful. And not only that, but I've also sometimes done a video of myself, and you've got to obviously get the approval of the others, but I want to see what my body language is like. And it just enables me to detach from the energy and the moment in the meeting to actually just look at it objectively. So that can be very helpful, and it's easy to do.
I like that. I think when I started the podcast that I do, I've listened back to myself interviewing people. So
Yeah.
I've learned I didn't even know that I had certain phrases or words that I used a lot. And then listening back, one of them was and I found, oh, I'm putting before lots of my statements. Like, that's a blah blah blah. Da da. And I realized, oh, this is something that I didn't even know. And da da da. So it's definitely a good practice. It's painful, but it's the best way to learn, isn't it? To actually watch yourself or listen to yourself. Mm. So I'm just thinking through, because what we want to do ultimately, we want to leave people with how can we improve board dynamics. We're going to turn to the questions that are in the chat. I see there's a bunch there, which is great. So anyone who wants to put a question, now's your time. But how do you suggest we address what might be called sort of unspoken or minor conflicts to be able to improve board dynamics?
Unspoken or minor conflicts. The indication is going to be the body language, the tone of voice, or the energy, giving us the signal, something needs to be dealt with here. And as I said before, just actively inviting an alternative point of view and validating the person for bringing that point of view out. I think when we're disagreeing with somebody, a good rule of thumb is before you disagree with me, acknowledge what you do agree with me about first that I've said before you just disagree. So I disagree, Stephen. I may disagree, Stephen, with something that you've just said about an important issue we're discussing. There's a lot of what you did say that I do agree with, and then there's this bit over here that I didn't agree with, and we'll go straight for the bit we didn't agree with. And it's almost like there's no overlap. So a good rule of thumb in dealing with conflict is to agree with as much as you can authentically agree with that the other person has said first, and then say your bit. And it's much more honouring of the other point of view. It makes it less confrontational. And
I
there's a
like
whole lot of
that.
other things that we could touch on there about rules of engagement as well.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Yeah, yeah. Well, feel free if you've got other ones. I've got one other that I think is helpful. We kind of touched on it before, but calling people back to the overarching purpose of why we're here. Because sometimes things can descend into, well, the worst case would be accusations, that it actually gets really personal and you said this and no, I didn't, and you said that. But as the chair, kind of reminding people, okay, let's take a breath. Why are we here? Let's not forget our purpose is, and then obviously, hopefully, everyone knows what the purpose is because that's central, that's the beating heart of an organization. And then just to throw in another element here, sometimes groups might have a spiritual dimension to what they're doing. So I'm thinking of a church group or a church context or, a religious faith context. So for that type of group, it might be appropriate to say, let's pray about this, or let's bring another dimension to this conversation which is beyond our human understanding. And so just to throw that in as well, because I think that's something that we shouldn't ignore. But did you have another thought there?
Um, yes, I think chairing meetings when it comes to the relational issues and conflicts and disagreement, there is an art to it, isn't there? And we're all going to do it a little bit differently. But yeah, agree as much as possible with what the other person has said before you disagree. I statements. Uh, it might be something like, Steve, you're interrupting me. Let me finish. Versus, I feel frustrated when I can't finish. I haven't been able to finish what the point I wanted to make.
Right.
You is accusatory and persecutory, and there's a power dynamic operating there. Whereas it's much more mutual and appropriately assertive to use an I statement. And whether that's with our friend, conflicts with our friends, our family, or in the board and charity space, that the same thing applies. We're always trying to hold on to the right of the other person to be respected, even if I don't agree with you. And another thing that's just really important in any relationship issue is empathy. So we've got empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is what I feel about what you're going through. Empathy is what you feel about what you're going through, and I express that. So if somebody's pretty uptight about a particular situation for whatever reason, you maintain, and you have a completely different point of view. You maintain the connection with that person on your board through empathy, not collusion, not by people pleasing, not by avoiding, not by minimizing, but by empathy. Steve, I see you've got a different point of view from me, and I can see that that means a lot to you, and you hold that really strongly. And no doubt there are some pretty good reasons for it. And I hear that. My perspective is this. So I'm empathizing. I'm not colluding, but I'm empathizing and honoring that person.
Mm.
So I think that's very important. And also sometimes when there's conflicts because we've done something wrong. And I think New Zealand culture is getting rather poor at apologizing. And you get, Clayton's apologies. But if we've done something wrong, apologize.
Mm.
That's very important.
Mm.
I think another thing that can sometimes be done is what I call de-intensifying the interpersonal space. So you're having there's a conflict, maybe in a board meeting or outside it, and you can appeal to, rather than, I'm not going to do that, I completely disagree with that. You can de-intensify the interpersonal space by, it's best practice in these situations that we do this. The board policy around this is this, or usually in this situation as an organization, we would do this. And you're just de-intensifying it. It's not just me against you, but you're appealing to best practice,
Mm.
um, the usual way of doing things, the board policy, etc. All these things used at the right time can be very helpful.
Yeah, so it's about really come back to that. We're proactive. It's about framing things in the right way. So instead of this being I and you, I really like the way you said that. This is how it makes me feel. Nobody can dispute the way that I'm feeling, and therefore it flows more naturally. We've got a couple of good comments and questions here, so we might turn to some of those. I have a feeling we're not going to get through all of them, so apologies if we don't get to your one, but we'll try to jump in and get a couple in a quick fire sort of context. So Mark has said here, when we get stuck in a moment of conflict in a board meeting, how do we move the meeting forward while the conflict hasn't been fully resolved? Sometimes the phrase, we'll take this offline, pops up. How should this be used if it's to be effective? Any thoughts on that one?
Yes, that's difficult, and I think it depends on what the conflict is, and it depends on how many of the people on the board have that issue. So it's just an isolated issue with one person, then it may be that that needs to be dealt with for the interest of the meeting, that put a hold on it at that point, and the meeting carries on with a commitment for the chairperson to talk to that person and connect with them and discuss it outside of the meeting. But if it's a conflict where there's a whole lot of different points of view and people are and it's really stuck, then I think often, so sometimes that can just be talked through further, and there's this idea of, we take positions on different issues, but what are our underlying interests? And we need to get beyond our positions. I don't go along with that. I don't agree with it. To what the underlying issue is. So, and people being able to get down that next level. Yes, we disagree on the surface about these things, but often we'll have common interests underneath it. I had a conflict with a person who's on a board I'm on. It was over money issues, and we had quite different perspectives, but we both had the common interest. Our main concern for both of us, that we wanted it to be fair, so we could connect and agree. Yes, okay, we want this to be fair, and it was a matter then. So we connected rather than just being at loggerheads. And okay, so what can we do to pursue a fairer way of sorting this out?
Mm.
So I think there's art in that, and it's very situation dependent, but it's a very relevant question, and sometimes quite a tricky one. Sometimes it can be helpful to get a bit of mentoring for a chairperson outside the meeting with somebody else who's an experienced chairperson. That can be useful as well.
Yeah, I think those are really good ideas, and I think it kind of focuses us on the role of the chair and the important role that they play. And you've emphasized that, and I can only tautoko and support it because I totally agree. And actually, as a side note, for all of those you're on committees or boards, when was the last time you said thank you to your chair? Why not get your phone out, send them a text message, and say, I really value what you bring to our board. Thank you. Because I can tell you, you don't get those messages very often, so it's nice to say thank you. Can I just maybe getting towards the end here, but thinking about the other situation, what if you're a member of a committee or a board and it's the chair who isn't, so this is from Gracie. She says, what if the chair isn't effectively inviting or valuing diverse perspectives? What sort of steps could we take? And then Carolyn and Alan have said, maybe you could ask questions like, oh, it looked like this person had something to add, or, try to make sure that others are being, even though you're not the chair, trying to make sure everyone's heard. But any thoughts on that? It could be a
I
tricky
think
one.
if the chair isn't on board with that kind of idea, and I immediately a situation comes to mind, um, it's actually very difficult, and you feel like you're pushing water uphill. And the if the chairperson isn't open to your encouragement to uh, for the different points of view to be voiced and heard, then even if those points of view are voiced and heard, then quite often, you're trying to get the chair on board as it can be, I think, pushing water uphill. I mean, as it is with any leader of a group,
Mm,
who basically wants things done their own way,
mm,
and for whatever reason, and is conflict avoidant and fearful of it. It's very limiting, not easy. But I think but the suggestion you made was a good one.
mm. Yeah, there's some other comments here saying if the chair isn't listening, then maybe you need to leave the leave the board as well. Like, I think my rule of thumb is if you raise the same issue like 3 times and the chair is not listening and there's no, you have to ask yourself, am I able to contribute? Is this the right board for me? And actually, as a side note, in companies, this is where boards get into trouble, or directors get into trouble because they stay on the boards too long and they end up being liable for the decisions that were made on a consensus type basis. They later on say, but I objected every time. It wasn't recorded in the minutes. There's no record of that, and you're liable like the others. So, just a little side note to be thinking about that. And Mele, who does a lot in this space in the Pacifica area, particularly says the responsibility to deal with conflict should not just sit with the chair. We all, as board members, have some responsibility,
Mm-hmm,
which
mm-hmm,
I think we probably both would
mm-hmm,
tautoko and support and
mm-hmm,
echo that.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe something to kind of, as we're drawing to an end, that's a message is that I hope each of you have felt like a learning here and that you, even if you're not the chair, that you can have a role to play on the boards that you're part of. And I hope that there's something, my challenge to you is to think about what's one thing or 1 or 2 things that you hadn't thought about before that you can take away with you. For me, it's thinking about my own history and how have I had conflict in the past and that idea of the transference. Like, I think I do this. If there's a difficult situation, I think I probably am bringing a lot of my own negative thoughts from previous dealings, nothing to do with this person or context. And so I need to be aware of that. But my point is, what is it for you? What is it that has stood out? So, Brett, as we finish, any final thoughts or, the golden
Yeah.
nugget of wisdom that if you could say one thing, what would it be?
Um, yes, I think one of the other things would be for on a board when somebody's talking too much, then it's easy for to wait until you can get a gap in the flow of that other person's conversation, but they're talking too much, and the chairperson needs to interrupt them. And the way you do that is not, Steve, can I stop you there? It's Stephen, can I hold you there for a moment? Hold, not stop. Validate. You've got lots of energy about this and lots of good thoughts about it. But can I hold you there? Let's hear what others have got to say. And if you don't do that, people get bored. They start losing interest. The energy in the meeting starts to go down. And the indication for you as the chairperson is you'll find yourself feeling a little bit bored and usually a little bit irritated. And I'm always monitoring that. If I'm feeling bored, irritated, then probably other people are as well. And it's time to intervene and interrupt. Can I hold you there, Stephen? You've got lots of good thoughts about that. Let's see what others have got to say.
And that ties in with something you said earlier, which I thought was really fascinating, that we sometimes are not aware of how long we're speaking. You know, we thought it was 5 minutes, but actually it was 10 minutes, or we thought it was 2 minutes, but actually it was 6 minutes. And in a way, I guess it's because we're the most fascinating person in the room, maybe. You know, like I've got so much to say here.
Yeah.
But you're right. The role of the chair is maybe sometimes to say, we need to hear from everyone. Yeah, that's really helpful. Well, I think there's been lots and lots of highlights for me. I'm sure that all of you have appreciated this as well. Thank you so much, Brett. We really value and appreciate your time. As I said to you before, you know, there's like 60 or so people on this, but we had another 60 or so signing up who will be watching it later. So actually, the impact here is going to be massive for different boards in different contexts. So thank you so much for joining us today. And just to finish off for each of you, please do think about what's one practical takeaway. This isn't meant to be just some entertainment. I saw something. Write it down. Think about it. What are you going to do to implement something that you learned today? And I think that if we can do this better, then our boards, our governance is going to be improving, which is ultimately the reason why we want to hold sessions like this. Just to finish off, this is going to become like an audio version on my podcast seeds, and then there'll be a video as well. If you've enjoyed it, then please help to share. I don't know how to make this more obvious than it is, but you know people that I don't know that Brett doesn't know. If this would help anybody, then why not put it in a newsletter or go on LinkedIn or paste it somewhere so that others, or send it to your board and say, hey, let's have a discussion about this kororo, this talk. The final thing from me is that I'm working in a law firm called Perry Field. We're really passionate about supporting boards, governance groups that are doing things. I know that each of you probably is part of organizations that has legal needs of some kind. So the next time there's a contract to review or there's a, you know, governance question, maybe keep us in mind as another alternative to your existing provider. See what we would charge. We're really reasonable price. We're very easy to go on with. And we offer support across property disputes, corporate commercial, and of course, charities and governance. So yeah, just keep it as an option to think about. And when this is done, I'll send out a link. So there'll be an email that comes probably in the next day or two. Tomorrow, I'm up in Auckland at a Nature and Business Symposium put on by Sustainable Business Network, and I'm releasing a paper called Nature as Shareholder. So that might interest some of you. It's looking at what does it look like if nature owns shares of a company, and I'll put it in the follow-up email. I'm quite passionate about it, so you might enjoy that. It's quite a different take on things. So have a look at that. And then have a look at some of the free resources we have as well. I'll put some of those in the email. So thanks everybody for joining. I realize some of you need to head off to the next meeting. I did just put out this little book called The Circle Careers with Impact. So if you'd like a free download, I'll put that in the follow-up email as well. It's just a bit of my own journey and reflecting on things I've learned about careers and work and what we do. Yeah, so thanks for joining. Great to have met you all. Look forward to connecting. We try to host these every month or 2 months. So if you'd like to join the next ones, you're very welcome to. We're trying to talk to different people, talk about different topics. If you've got an idea for a topic, something that would be relevant for boards or organizations, then pretty approachable. Feel free to drop me a line. But thanks everybody for joining, and we will catch you at the next event. Thanks.